Welcome, everybody. It is my great pleasure to introduce Joe Lucician and Christy Sherminsky. I hope that was correct, Christy?
Perfect.
Okay, good. We've had some practice. Joe and Christy and I, on different trips, have toured British Columbia from north to south, from east to west, over several years.
Yep.
More with Joe. Joe and I did a PBS for Families workshop. He did it. I was just a support person. I think probably 14 around the province. At one point, I thought I could probably do the presentation, and then I realized I couldn't, because what he does is actually quite, I think, brilliant. When Joe first approached me, and this was well over 10 years ago, and said he was doing a research in positive behavior support with children with challenging behaviors, and he described what he was doing, and my son had, I would say, 95.9% of all challenging behaviors ever in a book. He had them, and my automatic reaction to Joe was, where were you 5 years ago? And so I'm really happy to say that we have Joe, Dr. Joe as he's known throughout lots of the province, to train many behavior consultants in the province around functional behavior analysis and positive behavior support. And it's been a huge benefit. I don't think we know in BC how lucky we are in terms of the number of people who are being graduated from the University of British Columbia who have a strong foundation in positive behavior support and functional analysis of behavior, because it is foundational. So when we heard earlier today, we heard from Brenda Fawcett and Stephanie, and we heard from Stephanie Jewell. These are all graduate students who have studied as well, I believe, Christy, with Dr. Lucician, and it's made a huge difference to our community. ACT runs the Registry for Autism Service Providers, and we see, we get a lot of feedback from parents. And what they say to us very frequently is, yes, it's going very well in the basement. You know, my child knows their colors and their numbers. They can stack their blocks, but I can't take them to the grocery store. I'm unable to, everyday life is really very difficult because of all these challenging behaviors. So ACT is very keen that families understand positive behavior support, what it can do for them in terms of family functioning, and how actually it helps children learn, because it addresses the behaviors that gets in the way of learning. And it, most importantly, gets in the way of behaviors, or it can tackle behaviors that get in the way of family life. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joe and Christy.
Thank you, Deborah. You know, one should also say that anyone who's introduced by Deborah Pugh is very, very fortunate. That was a very gracious introduction to me and Christy. 皆さん、聞いていただいて本当にありがとうございました。一緒にクリスティさんと一緒に発表します。So since this is a presentation on culturally responsive PBS, I just greeted you in Japanese. I said, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We will do a presentation on culturally responsive PBS. So many people have participated in these studies. I'm going to present 3 studies. We will present 3 studies today. Christy Cheremsinski and also Catherine Schrader, who isn't here. She's in Kingston, Ontario right now, doing wonderful work. So the title is Culturally Responsive PBS with Families of Diverse Cultural and Linguistic Backgrounds. So how many here work with families from different cultures? They have a primary, almost everyone, is that right? Yeah. Well, welcome to BC, right? Welcome to the Lower Mainland. Also, welcome to North America. This is the trend right now. There's a tremendous need for culturally responsive PBS services. Research over the past 16 years has clearly documented the effectiveness and acceptability of PBS with families of children with developmental disabilities and problem behaviors. I actually am doing a review of all the studies. There's now about 20 studies over the last 16 years that document the acceptability and effectiveness of family-centered PBS. However, little of this research has been conducted with families of diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and although there's 1 or 2 studies that have, the focus was not on cultural responsiveness. It was just on improving problem behavior with no reference to culture, or little to no reference to culture. But as we know, and as this data I'm going to show you from a couple of statistics from the United States and Canada, there's growing diversity in the US and Canada, and this creates a great need for culturally responsive services, including culturally responsive PBS. Visible minorities accounted for 79% of recent population growth in the US and 83% in Canada over the last 10 years. So culture, let's talk about culture for a moment. So as I think all of you know, culture can have a profound effect on the interactions between families and care service providers. Families raising a child with disability may be influenced by cultural views on child rearing practices, disability, family roles and structure, communication styles within and outside of the family. I work with families who believe that the reason why they have a child with disability is that in their past life they did something that was bad, and now they're receiving some sort of karmic retribution. And they actually that's a cultural belief that you have to appreciate and respect. I work with families who the father culturally isn't involved in child raising. It's really the mother, and the father just watches from a distance while he goes off to work. Have you worked with such families? These are some of the experiences we have when we work with families of diverse cultures. And a failure to recognize cultural differences really can make collaboration and service delivery difficult when providing support to parents. How many have found some challenges in working with families of diverse cultures? Yeah, we have too. So let's talk about cross-cultural competence. In the field of psychology and special education, for the past 20 years, there have been dialogues about we need to become culturally competent, and what does it look like? So educators and mental health professionals agree that establishing culturally appropriate services, to establish culturally appropriate services, we need to develop what's called cross-cultural competence. And Cross and his colleagues define cross-cultural competence, I think, in a very nice, functional way. It's a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together. It enables a system, an agency, or a professional to work effectively in a cross-cultural situation. And that's a situation we often find ourselves in. So here's a definition of cross-cultural competence by Lynch and Hansen, who has written a lot about culturally responsive service delivery. There are 3 elements that they've defined. The first is awareness of one's own culture and heritage. If you wish to become culturally competent, you first need to understand the influences of your culture on you. A lot of North Americans, I'm from the States, a lot of Americans say, oh, there's no cultural thing. I'm just doing what one does as a human being. No, you're doing things as an American human being does. Because it's such a vast country, there's often not an understanding that there's also a culture that's driving your behavior. It's an American culture. It's different than other cultures. It's important to understand that as well for Canadians. Also, you need knowledge specific to the target family's culture. One really needs to know about the Japanese culture, the Chinese culture, the Indian culture if you really want to provide culturally responsive services. You have to study and learn. Also, we have to have the ability to apply cultural knowledge and develop skills necessary to work with the family. So we have to do skills development in using the cultural knowledge to be culturally responsive. So, with this in mind, Deborah Chen and her colleagues developed a cultural assessment tool to assist in the design of culturally appropriate positive behavior support plans. She did this in the year 2002. And there's 3 sections. And in the web page for ACT, you'll see that it's there. It's posted, this tool, so you're welcome to take it and use it. There's a section for planning for interaction with families. There's a section for gaining culturally relevant information. And there's a section for self-evaluating your interactions with family members with the aim of developing a culturally responsive partnership. So this is a very dynamic tool. It's designed to be used before you begin the service, just as you begin the service, and during the service, so you can develop yourself over time into a more culturally responsive practitioner. So here's some excerpts from the tool. This is actually the tool itself. You can see that the first part is planning. The questions, I won't go through all of it, but one of the questions is, how do I learn about the family's interactions and communication style? How will I discern differences with families when their practices conflict with the program or mainstream values? That was part of planning. Family assessment. Who are the members of the family, including the extended family? Who makes decisions in the family? What are the family's values and customs? And other such questions about culture. And finally, as you begin the work, you do a continual dynamic self-evaluation, and the questions you ask is, what information do I need to help the family? Have I clarified what the family expects of me and other service providers? Are there any concerns about my interactions with the family that need to be discussed or clarified? So you continually ask these questions. It's a type of contemplation. As you do the work, you ask these questions with a filter of, am I being culturally responsive? Because the answers you seek are ones that would lead you closer to being culturally responsive. Does this make sense? Clear? Okay. So there's a tremendous need for research on culturally responsive PBS. And I believe, and some of my colleagues believe, that positive behavior support is uniquely suited as a scientific discipline to empirically develop culturally responsive services, behavioral support services. Why? Because PBS has some qualities that lend itself to this type of research. The focus is on ecological validity, which is really developing methods, scientifically validated methods, that work in natural settings with natural agents of change. We really want to create a technology that parents can use in their daily life, not just researchers within controlled settings. We also want PBS is also committed to flexibility in regard to scientific practice. We are committed to a variety of different methodologies, not just one methodology. We value quantitative science. We also value qualitative science. And also, we're open to multiple theoretical perspectives. We believe many different theories and the different knowledge and practices that come from those theories can aid us in our work. And all of that is required if you want to become culturally responsive, and if you want to develop a science-based methodology of culturally responsive PBS. So combining quantitative and qualitative research methods provides a promising way to study and develop culturally responsive PBS. So we use single case study design methods to evaluate effects. You're all familiar with single case design? And then we use qualitative methods to understand cultural aspects of family life in the perspective of interventionists and parents involved in PBS services. So the study of culture traditionally for over 100 years now has used what kind of methodology? Pardon? I think the term is ethnography. If you want to study culture, you use ethnography. Boas, back in the turn of the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, did lots of research. Others also did research on culture using ethnography. Ethnography is a form of qualitative research. You have to study subjective experience using interviews and participant observations. And so this is why we think that this ethnographic part of research, this qualitative part of research, can really help us understand how to develop culturally responsive services. So, with no further ado in terms of introduction, we're going to show you 3 studies in culturally responsive family-centered PBS. The first study Christy will present. It's with a Japanese family, a 5-year-old boy with autism, was recently accepted into the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions. Then I will present the study with a Taiwanese family with an 8-year-old girl with moderate intellectual disability, which is in preparation for publication. And I will also present Catherine Schrader's study, which is still in progress with a Taiwanese family with a 5-year-old girl with autism. So with no further ado, there is further ado. Here's what's common about the studies in terms of methodology. The intermittent variable in all these studies is culture responsive, family-centered PBS. Here are the basic features. We build collaborative partnerships. We conduct comprehensive assessments. We design PBS plans for target family routines that the families determine and that the families define in terms of their vision of a successful routine. We identify and provide family-centered supports as may be needed beyond just support to the child. So if there's a need for sibling support, we provide that. If there's a need for marital support, we find the resources to provide that as well. Then we provide implementation support, and also we do follow-up evaluation and support as needed. We actually collect data after we stop providing intervention 1, 2, 3 months down the road to see whether the outcomes are durable over time. The dependent measures in these studies are percentage of intervals of problem behavior, percentage of routine steps completed in the target routines, also social validity, and contextual fit. Social validity is a measure of the acceptability and importance of the interventions, goals, procedures, and outcomes from the family's point of view. The research designs, one study uses a withdrawal design. That's an experimental design. That's Christie's study. Two studies use a multiple baseline design across 2 routines with 3 phases, baseline, intervention, and follow-up. And also, 2 studies use qualitative case study designs. This involves semi-structured interviews on family culture, using the family assessment from the cultural assessment tool, which I just went over with you. There's an interventionist journal. The interventionist, like Christie, actually kept a journal of her experience as she strove to become culturally responsive. And also, there was a review of coding categories by a qualitative researcher, Deborah Olson from the University of Oregon, who's a very skilled qualitative researcher, looked at all the data, looked at all the coding, and evaluated whether it was accurate and valid from her point of view. And also member checks with the families. We said, here's our theory about your culture, here's our theory about the support process that we experience. Do you think it's accurate? Any changes would you offer? The families, for the most part, agreed with the interpretations. And so with no further ado now, here's Christy.